For 1,000 years, Europe lived in the shadow of castles, kings, plagues, and faith. This was the age of swords and crowns, but also of learning, rebellion, and survival. It was an era of darkness and light, of collapse and rebirth. This is the story of medieval Europe. Our journey begins in the year 500 AD. The Western Roman Empire, the superpower of the ancient world, has crumbled. Europe is not a continent of nations, but a shattered mosaic of small, warring kingdoms. Great Roman roads fall into disrepair, cities shrink into shadows of their former selves, and long-distance trade grinds to a halt. People even dismantle magnificent Roman buildings, like the Colosseum, just for stone. Literacy, once a sign of Roman sophistication, becomes a rare treasure, almost completely vanishing outside the quiet walls of monasteries. Here, in candle-lit rooms, monks become the secret guardians of history, painstakingly copying the works of ancient Greece and Rome, preserving a legacy that the world outside has all but forgotten. Then, out of this fragmented world, a giant emerges. His name is Charlemagne. In a whirlwind of conquest, he reunites much of Western Europe, forging an empire not seen since the Romans. On Christmas Day in the year 800, he is crowned emperor in Rome, a symbolic act that attempts to resurrect the glory of the past. Charlemagne was a fierce warrior, but he also championed learning. He established schools and gathered scholars, desperately trying to rekindle the flame of knowledge, even though he himself struggled to learn how to write. But this unity was fragile. After his death, his vast empire fractured once again, yet its pieces would eventually form the foundations of modern France and Germany. The chaos that followed Charlemagne's death brought a new era of fear. Viking longships raided coastlines, Magyar horsemen stormed in from the east, and Saracen pirates attacked from the south. In a world without a central army for protection, people turned to local strongmen. This gave rise to feudalism, a system that would define the Middle Ages. Here's how it worked. A king granted land to powerful nobles, who in turn granted smaller plots to knights. In exchange, the nobles and knights pledged their loyalty and military service. At the very bottom were the peasants, or serfs, who worked the land for everyone else, bound to it for life. Their world was small. Most people never traveled more than 30 kilometers from the village where they were born. For protection, lords began building castles, which started as simple wooden forts on hills, but would evolve into the massive stone fortresses we imagine today. By the end of the 11th century, a new force was sweeping across Europe: religious fervor. In 1095, the Pope called for a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. This was the start of the Crusades. For centuries, waves of Europeans marched thousands of miles to the Middle East. They weren't all knights in shining armor. Many were peasants, merchants, and even children, driven by faith, the promise of wealth, or the hope of forgiveness for their sins. The Crusades were brutal and complex, but they had unintended consequences. The returning Crusaders didn't just bring back relics. They brought back spices like pepper and cinnamon, luxurious silks, and, most importantly, new ideas. These wars reopened trade routes between East and West that had been dormant for centuries, reawakening Europe's appetite for the wider world. This influx of trade and ideas sparked a revolution back home. All across Europe, towns and cities began to grow again for the first time since the Roman era. A new class of people emerged: the merchants and artisans. They organized themselves into powerful guilds, which were like unions that controlled the quality and price of everything from shoes to swords. Life in these new cities was crowded, dirty, but also vibrant and full of opportunity. And it was here that a new invention began to rule daily life: the mechanical clock. For the first time, people's days weren't just governed by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the ticking of hours. Time itself became a commodity, but what truly towered over these rising cities was faith. Religion was woven into the fabric of every person's life, from birth to death. The ultimate expression of this devotion was the Gothic cathedral. These were architectural miracles, soaring stone structures with pointed arches and ribbed vaults that seemed to defy gravity, reaching for the heavens. Building a single cathedral could take over a century, a project passed down from one generation to the next. The laborers who laid the first stones knew they would never live to see the final spire completed. For a population that was largely illiterate, these cathedrals were living books. Their massive stained glass windows depicted stories from the Bible, telling tales in vibrant color and light to all who entered. Then, in 1347, a catastrophe unlike any other arrived in Europe. It came on merchant ships from the east, carried by fleas on black rats. It was the Black Death. This terrifying plague swept across the continent with unimaginable speed and lethality. In just 4 years, it killed up to half of Europe's entire population, perhaps 25 to 50 million people. Entire villages were wiped off the map. Fear and panic gripped society. Some blamed minorities, others saw it as a punishment from God. The world was turned upside down, but this devastation had a surprising outcome. With so many people gone, there was a massive labor shortage. Suddenly, the surviving peasants had power. They could demand higher wages and better conditions, fatally weakening the old feudal system that had chained them to the land for centuries. As Europe reeled from the plague, its very nature of warfare was also changing. The 100 Years' War between England and France became the testing ground for new military technology. The age of the armored knight on horseback was coming to an end. The English longbow could pierce armor from a distance, and the invention of gunpowder and cannons made even the strongest castle walls obsolete. During this conflict, a humble peasant girl named Joan of Arc emerged, claiming to be guided by divine visions. She rallied the French army to incredible victories before being captured and executed, becoming an eternal symbol of French nationalism. Warfare was no longer just a contest of nobles. It had become a matter of nations and technology. By the late 15th century, the medieval world was breathing its last. Several key events signaled the dawn of a new era. In 1453, the great city of Constantinople, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, fell to the Ottoman Turks, sending shockwaves across Christendom. Around the same time, Johannes Gutenberg perfected the printing press. Suddenly, books could be produced cheaply and quickly. Knowledge, once locked away in monasteries, could now spread like wildfire, fueling debate, reform, and discovery. Finally, explorers like Columbus, funded by newly powerful monarchs, set sail across the Atlantic, shattering old maps and revealing a new world. Feudalism faded, the power of the church was challenged, and humanity's perspective shifted forever. The Middle Ages were over, the Renaissance had begun. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 1,000 years of history. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more explorations into our incredible past. See you next time.